As part of the inaugural National Economic Council meeting today, a major focus was on the removal of petroleum subsidy and implied removal of subsidy on foreign exchange, which has led to some convergence of some sort. The impact of these two actions definitely is increased prices. And as a way to solve the problem and reduce the shock, a presentation was made by the National Automotive Design and Development Council on great things that are happening in the automotive industry. It was reported that about 6 states in the country, including Lagos, Ogun, Anambra, Enugu, Akwa Ibom, Kaduna, and Kano, have benefited from domestic production of vehicles or assembly of vehicles by Nigerian companies or companies operating in Nigeria. And these companies include Inauguration, Mikano, Dangote Peugeot, Peugeot Automobile of Nigeria, Stallion, Hyundai, Honda, Elizade/Toyota, Coscharis and Ford, Kojo Motors, Jet Systems Motors. At the moment, about 50,000 jobs have been created by this simple action of either assembling vehicles in Nigeria or producing them in Nigeria. A great feat is that some of these companies have gone into the manufacture or assembling of electric vehicles and vehicles powered by CNG, compressed natural gas. And the impact of this is that the pressure on the price of petroleum products, particularly PMS, will be reduced the more we use electric vehicles and CNG-powered vehicles. Some of the decisions that we are taking include that legislative support will need to be given to these companies that are doing great things in Nigeria. It is important to underscore the point that our former president had made a commitment that by 2060, that Nigeria would join countries that would eliminate fossil fuel powered vehicles and move to electric vehicles in pursuit of the net zero emission that some of the countries in Europe, America, and Asia have signed on to. So if that must happen, then we need to ramp up the production of electric vehicles and CNG vehicles. It is estimated that if we give legislative support to these companies, that about 1 million jobs from the 50,000 jobs that exist in that industry would be created. It was also suggested that the funding that is required by most of these vehicle manufacturers and assemblers should be made available to them so that we begin to reduce the dependence on PMS and other fossil fuel powered vehicles. Finally, it was also suggested that electric vehicle development plan to fast-track the development of electric vehicles should be supported wholeheartedly by the new government. The reality is that we cannot run away from the removal of petroleum subsidy. We should have done it a long time ago. But we must salute the courage of the current government to bite the bullet and remove it. Initially, it had reduced the consumption from about 66, 67 million liters a day to just about 40 million. And as time goes on, the consumption will continue to go down. We know there are implications, particularly for the poorest of the poor, and that is why this government is seriously looking at palliatives to at least deal with the shock that the poor of our society goes through. That will be it from me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I would not say that the discussion has been hard, but if you agree with me that maintaining multiple exchange rates has not been the best for the country. And anytime you create room for arbitrage, people take advantage of it. So you saw situations where people can sit in the comfort of their homes and make hundreds of millions of naira simply because central bank allocated dollars to them at the official window, and they will just round trip it and sell at the black market window. So I think it's something that we have been shying away from. I call it subsidy. Some people call it something else, but it's subsidy. Anytime you subsidize, particularly if you are subsidizing consumption rather than production, it gives you the effect that you never really anticipated. It is also good news that as we are converging all the exchange rates, that our production and our levels of export are going up. Now, I know where your question is going. So what happens to the money that the central bank makes or is going to make from this convergence vis-a-vis the receipts from oil proceeds? Don't also forget that for the first time in this country, our total debt has crossed $100 billion. I think it's about $104 billion. We are using close to 120% that has just been reduced to 85% of our total revenue to service debt. So we have a lot of obligations. It's a very difficult time to be in government. So I believe that with the transparency that is being shown, and then you can actually ask questions, that we are at that point where we can say the economic situation will get better, but it gets difficult because before it gets better. So the challenges are going to be there, but over time, consistency will lead us to the promised land. I don't know if I've answered your question. Thank you. If we decide that we want to reduce imports and produce locally, there are a lot of things that need to change. It is estimated that about 50,000 jobs have already been created by the efforts that these companies that I reeled out are making without any support. If we do what we are supposed to do, 1 million jobs or more can be created. One of the issues to deal with in legislation will be the protection of those industries. How much do you want them to pay in terms of import duties? Because a lot of the CKDs are also imported from outside. There are a lot of things that you cannot make here. So do you want to give them some concessioning in terms of the import duties? How much do you want them to pay in terms of excise duties? Do you want to give them some tax holiday to encourage them to continue to produce locally? Are there some other incentives that you can throw out there to attract people who hitherto would have located those companies in China and Europe to bring them here? So those are some of the support that we believe require legislative action. Another area is also in terms of local content. How much of it do you want to encourage? So there are all sorts of issues bordering on legislation if we decide that we want to support local production. If you ask me personally, I believe that's the way to go. In the long run, you reduce the pressure on foreign exchange in importing virtually all the things that we use in this country. And then you create jobs and reduce the level of poverty in this country. Over time, also increase internally generated revenue. But you must back them with legislation. Thank you very much.